You two are frauds, and I understood every single word you just said in Russian. The waitress's voice cut through the $300 million deal like a bomb going off in the middle of a five-star restaurant. The two Russian businessmen froze in their seats. The Mafia boss, one of the most dangerous men on the entire East Coast, dropped his pen in midair. Todd, the manager, went white as a sheet. Nobody expected that the quiet, skinny girl who'd been invisible for 2 years carrying plates and filling glasses at Le Select would speak fluent Russian. And nobody could have imagined she was about to expose a fraud that wasn't just designed to steal $300 million, but to get the most powerful man in the room hunted down and killed by his own allies. Mikhail and Sergei had picked the wrong restaurant and underestimated the wrong person, because Josie Beckett wasn't just a waitress, and that was going to be the most expensive mistake they'd ever made in their lives. If Josie's courage just gave you chills, smash that like button right now, share this story with someone who's ever been underestimated, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now let's go back to where it all began. 14 hours earlier, when Josie Beckett woke up at 4:30 in the morning in a crumbling studio apartment in the Bronx with no idea that today would change her life forever. In the dim light of that early morning, Josie Beckett was lying on a thin mattress laid directly on the floor of a cramped studio in the Bronx. The alarm clock went off at 4:30 in the morning, but she'd been awake before it, eyes wide open and fixed on a ceiling stained with spreading patches of mold, listening to the scratchy scurry of rats inside the walls and the heavy, labored breathing of her mother in the old hospital bed set right beside her. Gloria Beckett lay there, the entire left side of her body completely still, ever since the stroke 4 years ago. Eyes squeezed shut, mouth pulled slightly to one side, her right hand occasionally twitching in her sleep. Josie sat up, rubbed her face, then began the familiar sequence of tasks so ingrained she could have done them with her eyes closed. She turned her mother gently onto her right side to prevent sores, changed the sheets, wiped her mother down with a warm cloth, dressed her in a clean shirt, then helped her sit up slowly and propped pillows behind her back. Gloria opened her eyes and looked at her daughter, her lips moving as she tried to say something, but only a blurred sound came out. Josie smiled, took her mother's hand, gave it a soft squeeze, and said, "It's okay, Mom, I'm here." She crushed the blood pressure pill, mixed it into a spoonful of yogurt, and fed it to her in small bites, patiently wiping the drops that slid down her chin. After that, she checked the blood pressure monitor, wrote the numbers into a small notebook that was nearly out of pages, then looked at the clock. 40 minutes left until Patricia arrived, the community nurse from the Medicaid program. Patricia could only stay for 1 hour a day, and after that, Gloria would be alone until Josie got home at 8 at night, 12 hours alone. Every time Josie thought about that, her chest tightened like someone's hand was closing around it. While she waited, she sat at the tiny kitchen table piled with envelopes, a hospital bill from last month's emergency visit, $3,200 after insurance paid their portion. A prescription bill, $480. This month's rent still unpaid. The electricity bill past due. Josie closed her eyes and swallowed the lump in her throat. She made $17 an hour plus tips at Le Select, working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and it still wasn't enough. It was never enough. Her hand drifted without thinking to the small photo taped to the refrigerator, the only one she had left of her father, Frank Beckett, standing in front of a small grocery store in the South Bronx, grinning wide, one arm around Josie when she was only 12. 3 weeks after that photo, her father died. Josie remembered every detail as if it had happened yesterday. That night, she'd been doing homework at the register counter while her father closed up the store. 2 kids with a gun rushed in, yelling for money. Her father put his hands up, told them to stay calm, said he'd give them everything, begged them not to hurt anyone. But one of them was shaking too hard and fired. The bullet hit her father in the chest. Josie ran to him, dropped to her knees on the tile, cradled him in her arms, blood soaking through her jeans, hot and sticky. Her father looked at her, his eyes already starting to fade, and whispered in a broken, uneven voice, "You have to live well, my girl. Always do what's right." Then his eyes closed. Josie was 12, kneeling in her father's blood, screaming until the ambulance arrived. 15 years had passed, and every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the warm blood on her hands. The doorbell yanked her back to the present. Patricia was here, on time as always. Josie gave quick instructions, kissed her mother's forehead, and stepped outside. November in New York cut straight through skin, and Josie pulled up the collar of her thin coat, walked 7 minutes to the subway, swiped a Metro card that was almost empty, and squeezed into the number 6 train at 5:15 in the morning. Around her were people like her, tired eyes, rounded shoulders, heading to work before the sun rose. Josie stood gripping the pole, closed her eyes, and let the rocking of the train carry her from stop to stop. From the Bronx to the Upper East Side took more than an hour. More than an hour to travel from her world to the world of the people she'd serve lunch to. The people who'd never know her name and would never want to. Josie pushed through the back door of Le Select at 6:30 in the morning, half an hour before her shift, like she did every day. She changed into her uniform in the staff room that was as tight as a closet. A white button-down shirt, a black apron, black flats with the heels worn down, then twisted her brown hair into a tight bun at the nape of her neck. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone designed to be invisible. Le Select before opening was a different world entirely. The crystal chandeliers dark, the empty tables and chairs cold, the sharp scent of floor cleaner mingling with butter drifting from the kitchen. Josie started wiping tables, folding napkins, polishing crystal glasses, checking each set of silver cutlery. She worked carefully because she knew Todd Brennan always found a reason, and this morning was no exception. Todd appeared at 7 o'clock, black suit, hair slicked back with shiny gel, a chunky silver ring on his finger that he bragged was designer but Della said he'd bought at a Canal Street flea market. He made a slow lap around the dining room, eyes sweeping over each table like a health inspector, then stopped exactly where Josie had just finished. He touched one finger to the marble tabletop, lifted it up under the light as if inspecting dust, then turned to Josie. There was no one else in the dining room. Todd always chose moments like that. He spoke softly, almost whispering, with the tone of someone offering helpful guidance instead of delivering a humiliation. Josie, I don't understand why you can't even manage something as simple as wiping a table. There's still a spot. She looked at the table again, spotless, not even a fingerprint, but she didn't argue. She'd learned that arguing only made everything worse. She said yes, I'll wipe it again right now. Todd didn't leave. He stood there with his arms crossed, watching her wipe it a second time. Then he shook his head. Still not good. Do it again. Josie wiped it a third time. Her hand clenched the cloth so hard her knuckles turned white. Todd tilted his head and lowered his voice even more. So low it felt like only the two of them existed. You know why you're here, Josie. Not because you're good. Because nowhere else would take you. No degree, no skills, nothing. You should be grateful I'm even letting you stand here. He gave her shoulder a light pat like she was a well-behaved child and walked away, whistling. No one witnessed it. There were no cameras recording in the dining room, because the restaurant respected the privacy of its VIP guests. Todd knew that. He always knew. Josie stood there alone, still gripping the cloth, jaw locked, eyes burning, but she didn't cry. She didn't cry here. Not ever. Tears were a luxury saved for later, for home, for the moment the door was locked and her mother was asleep. Josie had thought about reporting it. She'd gone online and read about workplace harassment, about employee rights, about how to file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But then she looked at reality. Todd never said those things in front of anyone else. No witnesses, no recorded proof, just her word against a manager's. And even if someone believed her, she'd need a lawyer. A lawyer cost money. Money she didn't have. And the thing she feared most wasn't Todd. It was losing her job. $17 an hour plus tips wasn't much, but it kept her mother's morning medication paid for. It covered the minimum payments on the pile of bills that never stopped growing. Losing Le Select meant losing everything. So Josie swallowed it. Every morning, she swallowed it. That was when Della Nguyen came out of the kitchen holding a tray of clean glasses and saw Josie standing beside a table that shone like glass, her face set and rigid. Della was 15 years older than Josie, the longest working server at Le Select, black hair pulled into a ponytail, small but quick on her feet. She looked at Josie, then toward Todd disappearing behind the bar, then back at Josie. She understood. She always did. Della stepped closer and murmured, again. Josie didn't answer, only gave the smallest nod. Della sighed, placed a hand on Josie's arm and squeezed for a single second before letting go, then turned away and went back to work. She didn't say more because she needed this job too. She had bills too, and she had no power to change anything. Two women trapped in the same snare, meeting each other's eyes and understanding everything, and still unable to do anything except keep wiping tables, carrying plates, and swallowing. Josie walked into the kitchen, set her cleaning cloth down on the stainless steel counter, and stopped in front of the glass door that led to the service hallway. Her reflection floated in the dark-tinted pane. Thin, hair pulled into a tight bun, black uniform, tired gray eyes. Someone born to be forgotten. That was how she survived here. Silent, head down, dissolving into the background. But what nobody knew, not Todd, not Della, not anyone in this restaurant or anywhere in her life, was that beneath that invisible shell, Josie was hiding a secret she guarded even more carefully than the tips she kept tucked in her pocket. 4 years earlier, when her mother had just had the stroke, and Josie was desperate for any extra work she could find, she signed up as a home care aide through a small agency in Queens. They paid $12 an hour, no degree required, just basic cooking, cleaning, and the ability to handle a difficult elderly person. The first and only client they assigned her was Irina Morozova, an 80-year-old Russian woman living alone in a small third-floor apartment in an old building in Rego Park after her husband died of lung cancer. The first day Josie arrived, Irina was sitting in an armchair by the window, White hair pinned up in a high bun, back straight as a ruler even at 80, looking Josie up and down before saying something in Russian. Josie didn't understand a single word. Irina didn't speak English well, only a few simple sentences, slow and thick with an accent. Josie didn't speak Russian. The first week they communicated with gestures, with expressions, with pointing at objects. Josie cooked soup. Irina nodded, or shook her head. Josie mopped the floor. Irina pointed to the spots she'd missed. Not many words, and yet strangely, no distance at all. Something linked the two women from the beginning, maybe because both of them were lonely. Maybe because both of them had lost the man they loved most and had to keep living with no one beside them. By the second week, Irina started teaching. Not in any formal, planned way, but as naturally as breathing. She pointed at a cup and said chashka. Josie repeated it. Wrong. Irina laughed and corrected her. Josie tried again. Right? Irina nodded. Then okno was window, voda was water, korosho was good. A few words a day, a few sentences each week. Josie didn't know why she remembered so quickly. Russian was hard, the pronunciation intricate, the grammar tangled. But something about the language pulled her in. Maybe it was because Irina's voice softened when she spoke Russian, warmer than those blunt little English phrases. Maybe it was because every time Josie pronounced a word correctly, Irina's eyes lit up and her smile made her wrinkled face look 10 years younger. Maybe it was because for the first time in her life, Josie felt like she was good at something. For 2 years, 3 times a week, Josie went to that apartment in Rego Park. She cleaned, cooked, cared for Irina, and learned. Irina gave her Russian children's books, then easy adult books, then old newspapers, then novels. She corrected Josie's pronunciation, taught grammar by telling stories from her youth in St. Petersburg, taught culture by cooking borscht and explaining each ingredient in Russian. Josie took it all in like someone who was drowning and finally breathing air. Russian became the one thing that belonged to her, the one thing no one could take away. Not Todd, not the pile of bills, not this harsh life. Then Irina's health declined. Her heart was weak, and the doctor said she needed surgery. But in America, she had no family to care for her afterward. Her daughter in Moscow begged her to come home. Irina didn't want to go, but she knew she had no choice. On the last day, Josie came to the apartment one final time. Irina sat in the familiar armchair by the window. Cardboard boxes packed all around, but on the table beside her chair she'd set aside a separate stack of books. More than 30 of them, in Russian, from children's books to Dostoevsky novels, along with 2 well-worn Russian-English dictionaries. She took Josie's hand, looked straight into her eyes, and said in slow Russian, "You have talent, my girl. Don't ever let anyone make you believe you're small." Josie cried. Irina cried too. They held each other in the empty apartment that would soon belong to no one. After Irina left, Josie didn't stop. She studied every night after her shifts, eyes stinging with exhaustion, still opening a Russian learning app on a phone with a cracked screen. She watched YouTube videos from Russian teachers, practiced listening to Russian news podcasts, read the books Irina had left page by page, wore down the dictionaries looking up words until the spines felt soft. 2 more years, 4 years total. No one knew. Josie didn't tell anyone because she knew exactly how they'd react. A poor waitress with no college degree, living in the Bronx, claiming she could speak Russian. Who would believe her? Todd would laugh in her face. Customers would look at her like she was lying, so she kept quiet, like she was holding a secret superpower that wasn't time to use yet. And that morning, standing in the kitchen of Le Select after Todd had humiliated her for what felt like the 1,000th time, Josie had no idea that moment was coming fast. At 11 in the morning, the restaurant started to fill. Businessmen in suits, women carrying handbags that cost more than Josie's rent for an entire year. People who looked straight through her as if she were made of air. Josie carried plates, poured water, cleared tables, repeating the same motions like a machine that had been programmed and never powered down. Then Todd came out from the manager's office, walking faster than usual. His face pulled tight in the way it only got when someone truly important was coming in. He gathered the servers quickly in a corner of the kitchen, voice low but sharp. "Table 7 has special guests today. I'm not saying important, I'm saying special. The kind of guests where if you mess up one glass, you won't just lose your job, you'll lose more than that." No one asked what more than that meant. Todd's eyes said enough. He glanced down at the order slip in his hand and read fast. Tristan Kincaid, CEO of Kincaid Holdings. International guests with him. Absolute confidentiality. Perfect service. Not one unnecessary word. The name Tristan Kincaid made Della suck in a hard breath. Josie looked at her and saw Della's face shift slightly. After Todd turned away, Della whispered, so low her lips barely moved, "You don't know him. Kincaid Holdings on paper is real estate and finance, but everyone in New York has heard the rumors. The Kincaid family. Don't look them in the eye. Don't listen. Don't remember anything. You understand." Josie understood. You didn't live in New York for 27 years without learning. There were names you were better off never saying out loud. Todd came back and pulled Josie into a corner. He grabbed her arm in the same spot, the spot still faintly bruised from last time, and squeezed hard. "You're serving table 7. Josie wanted to say, "Why me?" But she already knew the answer. Because she was the most invisible person in this restaurant. Because no one would notice her. Because that was exactly what Todd needed for a table that required absolute discretion. Todd leaned close to her ear, his breath thick with coffee. "Don't open your mouth. Don't look at their faces. You pour water, you set down plates, then you disappear. People like Kincaid don't want to know you exist. And honestly, you don't exist anyway." He released her, gave a thin smile, then walked out to the dining room to adjust the flowers on table 7 like he was the one who truly cared about service. Josie stood there for a second, rubbed the bruise on her arm, then went to prepare the table. Crystal glasses without a single smear, silverware aligned to the millimeter, linen napkins folded into fans, fresh flowers centered perfectly. Everything flawless for people who would never notice who arranged it. Exactly at 12 noon, the front door of Le Select opened, and the air inside the restaurant changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but it changed, like the pressure in a room rising all at once, and everyone feeling it even if no one said a word. Tristan Kincaid walked in. He was taller than Josie expected. Black hair, blue eyes, so cold she felt the temperature around her drop a few degrees from a single glance. A gray suit tailored to perfection down to every stitch. A watch on his wrist that Josie guessed was worth more than the studio she rented. But it wasn't the suit or the watch that created that aura. It was the way he moved. Each step slow and certain, like a man who owned every floor he set foot on. He didn't look at anyone, but he knew exactly who was looking at him. Right behind Tristan came Reed Calloway, a few years younger. Haircut in a military short style, eyes constantly sweeping the room like radar, jaw clenched, his right hand held slightly curved at his side, with the habit of someone who always carried a weapon. 2 more bodyguards stayed by the door, stone-faced, broad-shouldered, blocking the entrance. With Tristan were 2 men. Mikhail Volkov, around 48, thin, wire-rimmed glasses, salt and pepper hair, an expensive black suit, the smile of a man who knew how to say what people wanted to hear. Sergei Petrov, younger, around 38, broad-shouldered, quieter. His hands never leaving a thick brown leather briefcase he held close to his body like a child. Todd nearly folded in half in greeting. "Mr. Kincaid, it's a great honor. Your table is ready." Tristan didn't answer, only gave a small nod and walked straight to table 7. He didn't need anyone to lead him. Mikhail and Sergei followed with polite smiles. Reed Calloway stopped to say something very fast to Todd that Josie couldn't make out, but she saw Todd nodding over and over like a toy bird. Josie approached the table, dipped her head, poured water, and set down the menus. Her hands were steady, professional, not shaking. She was the perfect ghost. Tristan seemed not to look at her, but his cold blue eyes subtly tracked every movement she made, noting the professional mask she wore and the faint, dark bruise peeking from beneath her sleeve. Mikhail didn't look at her. Sergei didn't look at her. She didn't exist. The conversation began in English. Tristan spoke in short lines, his voice low, every word carrying weight. "This deal is priority number 1. $300 million, investment into a mining project in Siberia, everything routed through legitimate companies. No mistakes." Mikhail answered in English, his Russian accent heavy but fluent. "Of course, Mr. Kincaid. Our side has prepared everything. This will be cooperation that benefits both parties." Josie listened without showing she was listening, watched without showing she was watching. She poured more water, stepped back a few paces, standing close enough to serve but far enough to become furniture, and she understood why there was no interpreter at this table. A $300 million deal, routed through channels, sunlight never touched. The kind of deal where every additional person who knew was a risk. An outside interpreter could be bought, could be set up, could sell information to a rival or to the FBI. Tristan Kincaid wasn't the kind of man who accepted that risk. The Russian side had agreed to negotiate entirely in English, and Tristan believed he controlled everything at this table. But there was one thing he didn't control, one thing he had no idea existed right beside him. The invisible girl pouring his water understood Russian. The appetizer was served, bluefin tuna tartare with black truffle, each plate priced at what Josie ate in a week. She set each dish down with precise, gentle movements, then stepped back to her usual spot beside the service station. The 3 men continued speaking in English. Tristan laid out the investment structure in short, efficient lines. The money would pass through 3 layers of intermediary companies before reaching the mining project in Siberia, each layer perfectly legal on paper, clean enough that any audit would find no crack to pry open. Mikhail nodded again and again, praised the structure as tight, asked a few technical questions about the transfer schedule. Sergei opened the leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and slid it across the table to Tristan. Contracts, Extraction permits, geological reports, bank guarantee letters. Tristan flipped through page after page, slow but not reading too closely. He trusted the team of lawyers who'd reviewed it already, trusted the professionalism Mikhail displayed, and trusted his own instincts. Instincts that had never been wrong. Until today. Josie stepped forward to refill Tristan's water, then moved around to Mikhail's side. Right as she tipped the pitcher, Mikhail turned to Sergei and said a quick sentence in Russian, his voice low, casual, the way co-workers exchanged something private that only they understood. He's exactly what Intel said. Careful on the surface, but once he trusts someone, he trusts blindly. He's not checking anything closely. Josie's hand tightened around the pitcher. Her heart skipped a beat. She understood every word, not vaguely, not guessed from context, but clearly, each word sharp and complete, as if Mikhail were speaking directly into her ear in English. Sergei answered in Russian too, quieter but distinct. Good. The more he trusts, the faster he signs. Once he signs, nothing can be undone. Josie finished pouring, her hand steady, but inside her everything was collapsing. She stepped back 2 paces, her face blank, exactly like a ghost was supposed to be. But her mind was spinning. These 2 men weren't talking like partners building a deal. They were talking like predators circling prey. The Russian was short, cold, and terrifyingly confident. This wasn't negotiation. This was a trap, and Josie was the only person in the room who knew it. The meal continued. The main course was served, Wagyu beef tenderloin with red wine sauce and truffle mushrooms, each plate presented like a piece of art, and Josie knew it cost about the same as a month of her mother's medication. She set the plates in front of each man, cleared the appetizer dishes, kept every glass topped off. Tristan cut his steak with slow, precise motions, eating as he listened to Mikhail describe the mining project's timeline. On the surface, everything was perfect. 3 businessmen enjoying an extravagant lunch in the most luxurious restaurant on the Upper East Side. But Josie was listening to an entirely different conversation. Mikhail and Sergei were switching into Russian more often now, more naturally, more comfortably. They were completely certain no one in this American restaurant understood their language, and the more certain they became, the more they said. Josie stood beside the service station with the water pitcher in her hand, her face as empty as a blank wall, but her ears were catching every syllable. Mikhail sliced off a piece of steak, chewed slowly, then spoke to Sergei in Russian, calm as if he were discussing the weather. The Cyprus account is ready. When he transfers the $300 million, the money will sit there for exactly 48 hours. Then we move it to Cayman, split it into 6 smaller accounts across 3 different banks. If anyone can trace it, the sun rises in the west. Sergei nodded and took a sip of wine. The mining permit is fake. The geological report is fake. The bank guarantee letter is fake too. Everything in that leather briefcase, from the first page to the last, not a single sheet is real. But it's perfect. It took 6 months to make. Even the best auditor would need at least a few weeks to catch it, and by then it'll be too late. Josie felt the blood drain from her face. She was standing less than 2 meters from these men, water pitcher in hand, and she had just heard that the entire $300 million deal was a performance built from start to finish. The company didn't exist. The project didn't exist. The Siberian mine didn't exist. It was all a trap manufactured over 6 months to swallow Tristan Kincaid's $300 million whole. But what truly sent cold down Josie's spine was the next line. Mikhail wiped his mouth with the linen napkin, leaned closer to Sergei, and lowered his voice a little more, but Josie still heard every word with brutal clarity. The best part is, after the money disappears, he can't come looking for it, because by then, he'll be busy staying alive. Sergei's mouth curved in a thin smirk. Is the evidence ready? Perfect. Mikhail answered, his eyes gleaming. We have fake emails, fake texts, even an edited audio recording, all of it showing Kincaid selling internal information to the feds. When the allied families get it, they won't ask questions. They won't verify. In their world, suspicion is enough. They'll hunt him down before he can even open his mouth to explain. Sergei nodded slowly, voice cold. So he loses $300 million, and he loses his life. 1 arrow, 2 targets. Mikhail lifted his wineglass. No, comrade. 1 arrow, 3 targets. The money, the life, and the entire empire he has led for over a decade collapses with it. When the boss dies, the wolves will tear his territory apart, and will be sitting in Cayman watching from far away. They clinked glasses lightly, crystal chiming clear, then turned back to English with Tristan, as if nothing had happened. Josie stood there. The pitcher in her hand was ice cold, but her palm was slick with sweat. She had just heard a plan to steal $300 million, destroy an empire, and kill a man sitting within arm's reach. This wasn't a financial scam. This was a death sentence. Josie set the water pitcher down on the service counter with both hands, because she was afraid she'd drop it, then moved quickly into the kitchen. She went straight to a hidden corner behind a stainless steel shelf stacked with pots, pressed her back to the cold brick wall, and tried to breathe. She couldn't. Her chest tightened like a fist was closing around it. Her lungs refused to work. Her hands shook so badly she had to pin them against her thighs so the line cooks wouldn't see. Cold sweat slid down her spine even though the kitchen was blazing hot. Her heart hammered wrong. Not just fast, but off rhythm. Racing, then stalling. And she could feel her pulse in her throat, in her temples, in the tips of her fingers. She'd just heard 2 men plan to steal $300 million and murder someone at a table an arm's length away. And she was the only person on Earth who knew it. What was she supposed to do now? Tell who? Todd. He'd laugh in her face, or fire her on the spot for daring to stir trouble with VIPs. Call the police. And say what? I'm a waitress. I overheard 2 Russians talking about scamming a Mafia boss. Please believe me. They'd think she was crazy. And even if someone did believe her, police showing up meant the FBI would learn about a $300 million deal. Meant Tristan Kincaid would be investigated. Meant she'd just blown up both sides. And both sides were the kind of people who could make her disappear and never be found. If she spoke up, she was placing herself in the middle of the underworld. A world where violence wasn't a threat. It was daily language. A world where her father had died to violence even though he had nothing to do with it. But if she stayed silent, Josie closed her eyes and the images came without being invited. Tristan Kincaid signing the contract, transferring the $300 million, the money vanishing into Cyprus and then Cayman. 48 hours later, the allied families receiving the fake evidence. No one verifying. In that world, suspicion was enough. Mikhail had said it. And then, Tristan Kincaid, the man sitting within arm's reach, would be hunted down by the very people he trusted. And Josie would have to live the rest of her life knowing she could have stopped it but chose silence. Josie opened her eyes. The white brick wall of the kitchen blurred, replaced by the tiled floor of her father's grocery store in the South Bronx 15 years earlier. Blood on her knees, her father's hand in hers, growing weaker, growing colder. Her father's broken voice. You have to live well, my girl. Always do what's right. Then Irina's voice, warmer, softer, in Russian. Don't ever let anyone make you believe you're small. 2 voices, 2 languages, the same message. Josie stood there with her back against the cold wall, eyes open and fixed on nothing, and she felt as if those 2 people were standing beside her, waiting for her to decide. Josie, coffee for table 7, now. Todd's voice ripped through the silence from the kitchen doorway. Josie flinched, yanked back into the present. Table 7. 3 men. $300 million. A death sentence being signed right now. She wiped the sweat from her hands onto her apron, stepped to the espresso machine, and placed 3 cups of espresso on a silver tray. Her hands were still shaking, but not enough for anyone to notice. She looked down at the 3 cups of black coffee, the surface trembling slightly with the tremor in her fingers, and she knew that when she walked back through that kitchen door, she would have to choose silence and safety, or speak up and have no idea what would happen next. Josie pushed the kitchen door open with her shoulder, both hands steadying the silver tray with 3 cups of espresso. Every step from the kitchen into the dining room felt like a century. She still hadn't decided. Or maybe, more truthfully, she was trying to find a reason not to decide. Maybe she'd misheard. Maybe her Russian wasn't as good as she thought. Maybe they were joking, but she knew she hadn't misheard. 4 years of study, thousands of hours of practice. She'd heard every word as clearly as English. And nobody joked about $300 million in a voice that cold. Table 7 came into view. Tristan had a pen in his hand, the folder open in front of him. The last page. Mikhail sat across from him, fingers laced on the table, wearing the patient smile of a man who knew he was about to win. Sergei sat beside him, the leather briefcase now open, another set of documents waiting inside. Reed Calloway stood a few steps from the table, eyes sweeping the room out of habit but not sweeping the one place he needed to, because the threat wasn't outside. It was sitting right in front of his boss, smiling politely, sipping French wine. Josie approached the table and set down each cup of coffee, in front of Tristan, then Mikhail, then Sergei. When she placed the last cup in front of Sergei, he glanced at her, then turned to Mikhail and spoke in Russian, quiet but dripping with contempt. This girl isn't bad. Look at that blank face. Typical American. Doesn't know anything but English. You could read the whole plan out loud in front of them, and they'd still smile and nod. Mikhail gave a soft laugh and took a sip of espresso. That's why this is so easy. Americans think the whole world speaks their language. They don't bother learning anything else. Arrogant. And arrogance has a price. Josie stepped back, her face empty. She was used to being dismissed, treated like an object, spoken about as if she weren't standing there. Todd did it every day. Customers did it every hour. She'd become immune. But today was different. Today the contempt came packaged with a plan to kill someone. Tristan signed the last page. The sound of the pen sliding over paper was light, ordinary, like it was just another signature among the millions in his life. But Josie knew that signature could kill him. Mikhail reached across the table, took the signed folder back, smoothed it flat, and slipped it into Sergei's briefcase. Then he leaned in and added one more sentence in Russian, low and slow, each word heavy as a bullet. When his allies get the evidence we planted, Kincaid will die with no place to be buried. No one escapes Mafia loyalty. Betrayal is a death sentence, and he won't be able to prove he's innocent, because our evidence is too perfect. 300 million and one life. The best job of our lives. Sergei lifted his espresso. In place of congratulations, the 2 cups clinked softly. Josie stood by the service station, less than 3 meters from the table, and something inside her broke, not in the way that collapses. In the way a door held shut for too long finally blows its hinges clean off. She'd been silent her whole life. Silent when Todd humiliated her. Silent when customers treated her like air. Silent when she swallowed her tears every night in that moldy studio. Silent because silence was safe. Silent because speaking up meant getting crushed. But that night on the grocery store floor, her father hadn't told her to be safe. He told her to do what was right, and Irina hadn't taught her Russian so she could hide it forever. She'd taught her so Josie would know she wasn't small. Josie set the empty silver tray down on the service station, gently, without a sound. She looked at table 7. Tristan was saying something to Mikhail in English, relaxed, confident, completely unaware he'd just signed his own sentence. Mikhail nodded, smiling wide. Sergei closed the briefcase and snapped the lock shut. Todd stood farther away with his arms crossed, satisfied because the VIP table was going smoothly. Josie drew a deep breath, the deepest she'd ever taken in her life. The restaurant's cool air filled her lungs, sharp and clean. Then she walked. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, toward table 7. "Excuse me." The words came out smaller than she wanted, almost a whisper, swallowed by the soft jazz drifting from the ceiling speakers and the clink of cutlery from nearby tables. No one heard her, or no one cared to. Tristan was still talking to Mikhail about the transfer schedule. Mikhail nodded, casually turning his wine glass. Sergei checked his phone. Todd stood by the bar with his back to her. Josie swallowed, her throat dry and raw. Every cell in her body was screaming at her to turn around, go back into the kitchen, pretend she hadn't heard anything, survive today, and then tomorrow, and the next day, the way she'd survived for 27 years. Safe, invisible, alive, but her feet didn't move. "Excuse me." This time her voice landed clearer, harder, enough to make Tristan stop mid-sentence, enough to make Mikhail look up, enough to make Todd whip around with his face twisted in fury, and enough to make Reed Calloway take his hand off his hip, step forward 1 pace, and lock his eyes on Josie like a target. Todd got to her first. He crossed the dining room in long strides, face flushed purple, veins standing out in his neck, and grabbed Josie's arm, the same spot as always, the same crushing grip, only this time harder, hard enough that Josie had to clench her teeth to keep the pain from escaping as a sound. "Are you out of your mind?" Todd hissed through his teeth, voice low but sharp as a blade. "Get back to the kitchen, right now. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Josie didn't move. She stood there with her arm burning in Todd's hand, eyes not on Todd but fixed on table 7, on Tristan Kincaid. He was looking at her, for the first time all through lunch, for the first time that day, maybe for the first time in her entire life. Tristan Kincaid was truly looking at her. Not past her, not over her, but at her. Those cold blue eyes settled on her face, and Josie saw something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not annoyance. Attention, the kind of attention a man earned by surviving 30 years in the underworld, reading people through their eyes. And Josie's eyes right now weren't the eyes of someone making a scene. They were the eyes of someone gambling her life. "Wait." Tristan lifted his right hand, palm open, facing Todd. 1 word, not loud, not violent, but powerful enough that Todd let go of Josie as if he'd been shocked. Todd stepped back 2 paces, mouth still open, but he didn't dare add another word. Reed Calloway stayed still, eyes still locked on Josie, his right hand slightly curved at his side, ready for anything. Mikhail and Sergei exchanged a quick look, the kind of look most people would miss, but Josie saw it clearly. Confusion. Alarm. "What is it?" Tristan said, voice low, no question mark, not a polite inquiry but an order. "Speak." Josie felt her heartbeat in her throat, in her temples, in her fingertips. The entire restaurant seemed to shrink, collapsing into a single point until there was only her and the man staring at her with cold blue eyes that didn't blink. She opened her mouth. Her voice trembled on the first word, steadied on the second. "Mr. Kincaid, you're being set up. These 2 men aren't investors. Everything in that briefcase is fake. The contracts, the mining permits, the bank guarantees, all of it. They're going to steal $300 million from you, and then they're going to frame you. They've built false evidence to make it look like you betrayed your allies. Emails, messages, audio recordings, All fabricated. Once your associates see it, they won't ask questions. They'll come for you. You won't get a chance to explain. Silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that weighed so heavy Josie could feel it pressing down on her shoulders. No one breathed. No one moved. The jazz still played overhead, but it sounded like it was coming from another planet. Mikhail broke the silence first. He laughed, short and dry and controlled. Mr. Kincaid, this is absurd. Your waitress is clearly having some kind of breakdown. I don't know what she's talking about. Sergei nodded, face calm, but his fingers were tightening around the handle of the leather briefcase under the table. Josie saw it. Perhaps she should be removed. Mikhail continued, voice gentle, concerned, like he was offering the obvious solution. For her own good, of course. This is embarrassing for everyone. Todd saw his opening and lunged in. Security. Sergei, sensing the sharp shift in the room's tension, quickly pulled the leather briefcase from under the table and placed it securely on the empty chair beside him, keeping a protective hand on the handle. Somebody get security. This girl is insane. She's ruining everything. Get her out of here. But Tristan didn't move. He didn't look at Mikhail. He didn't look at Todd. He didn't look at Reed. He looked at Josie, and Josie didn't drop her gaze. How do you know this? Tristan asked, his voice flat, level, smooth as a frozen lake. But Josie saw something moving under that ice. Dangerous. Ready. Waiting. He didn't believe her yet. He didn't disbelieve her either. He was weighing her. Every word, every expression, every millisecond. Josie knew she had one chance. If she couldn't prove it right now, Mikhail would flip the story, Todd would get security, and she'd be dragged out like a disturbed troublemaker before she could say another word. Because I speak Russian. 6 words. Josie said them slowly and clearly, each one separated, her eyes never leaving Tristan's. I understood every word they said since they sat down at this table. Every single word. Mikhail gave a sharp little snort of laughter, quicker than before, tighter than before. Mr. Kincaid, this is ridiculous. She's a waitress. She doesn't speak Russian. This is clearly a Josie didn't let him finish. She turned to Mikhail, looked him straight in the eye, and began speaking in Russian, fluent, precise, one sentence at a time. You said the 300 million would be transferred to an account in Cyprus. Sit there for 48 hours, then be split into 6 smaller accounts across 3 banks in Cayman. You said if anyone could trace it, the sun rises in the west. The smile on Mikhail's face died. It didn't fade. It didn't dim. It died instantly, like someone had flicked off a switch. The color drained from his skin from pink to gray in less than a second. Josie didn't stop. She turned to Sergei and continued in Russian, her voice harder now, sharper. You said the mining permit is fake. The geological report is fake. The bank guarantee letter is fake. Everything in that leather briefcase, from the first page to the last, not a single sheet is real. It took 6 months to make. That is exactly what you said. Sergei, reaching for his espresso now that his hands were free, felt his fingers freeze as Josie began to speak. His hands started to tremble the moment Josie began speaking Russian. And by her last sentence, the tremor had turned into a complete loss of grip. The cup slipped from his fingers, hit the marble tabletop, and shattered. The crack of porcelain rang through the dining room's absolute silence. Black coffee spread across the white tablecloth like blood. No one moved. Josie still wasn't finished. She stepped half a pace closer to the table, her Russian now completely steady. No shaking, no hesitation. 4 years of learning poured into this single moment. But the most dangerous part isn't the money. You prepared false evidence, fake emails, fake messages, an edited audio recording, all of it to frame Mr. Kincaid for selling information to the feds. You know that in this world, suspicion is enough. No one verifies. You want his allies to turn on him and hunt him down before he can even open his mouth to explain. 300 million and 1 life. That is exactly what you said. She looked straight at Mikhail. You also said this would be the best job of your life. The dining room at Le Select was dead silent. At the surrounding tables, the businessmen, the women with their polished faces and expensive jewelry, had stopped eating at some point. Forks suspended mid-air, eyes fixed on table 7. Todd stood frozen, mouth open. No sound coming out. One hand still lifted at chest height, in the posture of calling for security, like he'd forgotten how to lower it. Reed Calloway had taken his hand off his hip, not because he was less alert, but because he understood the threat wasn't the waitress. He was looking at Mikhail and Sergei with an entirely different kind of focus now. Mikhail sat motionless, both hands on the table, knuckles white from gripping too hard. His face held not a trace of blood. Sergei stared down at the broken cup on the table, white shards sitting in a pool of black coffee, and his whole body was shaking. The kind of shaking you couldn't control, the kind of shaking that happened when a man realized everything had just collapsed. Tristan Kincaid leaned back in his chair, slowly, with control. He looked at Josie, then at Mikhail, then back at Josie, and for the first time, Josie saw something in those cold blue eyes she'd never seen in anyone looking at her. Respect. Tristan didn't shout. He didn't slam the table. He didn't stand up. He only said 2 words, in a voice so low it was almost inaudible, but each syllable cut through the air sharper than any scream. Lock it. Reed Calloway reacted in less than a second, as if he'd been waiting for that order his entire life. Phone to his ear, 1 short line, then he pocketed it. The 2 bodyguards at the front door moved in at the same time, shut the entrance, and took their positions. A 3rd man appeared at the back, blocking the passage leading to the kitchen alley. Within 10 seconds, every exit from Le Select was sealed. Mikhail saw it. He tried to hold on to calm one last time, his English starting to tremble at the edges. Mr. Kincaid, you can't possibly believe this girl over us. We have documents, credentials, references. We've been working with your legal team for months. She is nobody. Tristan didn't look at Mikhail. He was looking at Reed, and Reed understood without needing more. Tristan's right hand pulled out his phone, dialed fast, spoke in a few clipped sentences, then started moving on the screen. The dining room was so silent Josie could hear the soft swipe of Reed's thumb across glass. Less than 2 minutes later, Reed lifted his head, looked at Tristan, and shook his head once. Just one shake, but it said everything. Josie understood. Tristan understood. The company listed in the contract didn't exist. The bank account was an empty shell. Everything the waitress had said was true. Tristan stood up, slowly, centimeter by centimeter, like a large predator rising in front of its prey. He was taller than both Mikhail and Sergei, and when he straightened to his full height in that perfectly tailored gray suit, his shadow fell over table 7 like darkness swallowing daylight. He didn't look at Mikhail. He didn't look at Sergei. He looked down at the documents he'd just signed. Now inside the leather briefcase, Sergei was clutching with both trembling hands. Then he spoke in English. So slow, each word landed like a hammer against a coffin. I'm not going to ask why. I'm not going to ask who you are. I don't need to know. Reed. He didn't turn. He didn't have to. Reed was already at his shoulder. Take them. 2 words. Soft, ordinary, like clear the table or call the car. But Josie watched the blood drain from Mikhail's face so fast it looked like someone had opened a valve. He understood what those 2 words meant in Tristan Kincaid's world. Mikhail opened his mouth, trying to say something, but Reed's hand was already on his shoulder. Not hard, not violent, just placed there. But it was the hand of a man who wasn't used to being refused. Sergei didn't need to be touched. He stood immediately, unsteady on his feet, face white as paper, still hugging the briefcase until Reed took it from him with smooth, decisive ease. 2 bodyguards stepped in, 1 on each side. They didn't speak. Mikhail and Sergei were escorted through the dining room, between tables of guests frozen in silence, past Todd pressed against the wall like a man without a soul, out the back door, into the kitchen alley, where a black SUV with tinted windows had been waiting. Somehow, the whole time. There was no screaming, no begging, only the sound of leather shoes on marble, the sound of a car door opening and shutting, the engine starting, then fading away, then silence. Josie stood beside table 7, staring at the empty chair where Mikhail had been sitting, at the dark coffee stain drying on the white tablecloth, at the broken porcelain still scattered there. She didn't know where those 2 men were being taken. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. When the restaurant door closed behind Mikhail and Sergei, Tristan turned to Todd. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was low and slow, each word dropping like a heavy stone. I watched her from the moment I sat down. I saw the way you grabbed her arm. I saw the bruise. I saw the way you looked at her, the way you treated her like an object the second you thought my focus was elsewhere. Todd opened his mouth. Mr. Kincaid? I didn't. Tristan lifted a hand, 1 finger, and Todd went silent. She just saved me $300 million, and maybe saved my life. And what did you do? I recognize your kind, Todd. You crush those who work for you to feel powerful, then crawl at my feet for a tip. You think I didn't notice the bruise you left on her arm. I saw everything, and I'm not impressed. Todd stepped back, his face gone gray, lips moving but no more words coming out. Tristan had already turned away, walking toward a small table in the corner of the restaurant, away from the guests' curious eyes, away from the broken cup and the black coffee stain on table 7. He pulled out a chair, sat down, then looked at Josie. Sit down, please. Not an order, not a polite formality, an offer. Josie sat in the chair across from him. Her legs were still shaking, the adrenaline draining out and leaving exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She'd just done the most reckless thing of her life, and still had no idea what the consequences would be. Tristan studied her in silence for a few seconds. His blue eyes were still cold, but different now, the edge still there, yet underneath something was searching, trying to read her the way he read a contract he'd never seen before. Where did you learn Russian? Josie drew a breath. 4 years ago, I worked as a home care aide in Queens. I took care of an elderly Russian woman, Irina. She was 80, living alone, her husband dead, nobody to talk to. I didn't have anyone to talk to either. She taught me Russian every time I came. For 2 years. Then she had to go back to Russia because of her health. She left me her books. I taught myself for another 2 years. She paused and swallowed lightly. 4 years total. No one knows. Tristan didn't interrupt. He didn't nod. He didn't look moved or impressed. He only listened. And Josie realized this might have been the strangest thing she'd seen all day. A man used to commanding an entire empire sitting still and actually listening to a waitress tell a story. You take care of someone at home, Tristan said. Not as a question, as a statement. He'd read something on her face, in her tired eyes, in the way she'd walked that morning like someone who'd been awake before dawn too many days in a row. My mother, Josie answered. A stroke 4 years ago. Half her body paralyzed. She can't speak clearly. I take care of her in the morning. A community nurse comes for 1 hour. Then my mother is alone until I get home. 12 hours. Every day. She didn't say more about the hospital bills, about the pile of envelopes on her kitchen table, about the nights she lay awake calculating whether she'd have enough money for her mother's medicine this month. She didn't need to. Tristan looked at her and she knew he understood. You knew who I am, Tristan said, his voice a little lower. Josie nodded once. You knew what world this is. What kind of people sit at that table. What could happen to you if you opened your mouth. Josie nodded again. And you still spoke up. Tristan leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on hers. Why? Not angry, not challenging, truly wanting to understand. One word. But Josie heard behind it an entire lifetime inside a world where no one did anything without a motive, where no one risked their life without money, where no one was good without a price, and she had just broken every rule he knew. Josie looked down at her hands on the table. Small hands, rough from scrubbing, nails cut short, no polish. Then she looked up. Because I carry a promise made in blood. When I was 12, I watched my father lose his life defending our small store. As he took his last breath in my arms, he told me to always do what's right, no matter the cost. Today, I simply kept that promise. The last thing he said to me was always do the right thing. She paused for a beat. So that's what I did. Tristan said nothing. Not for a long time. He sat back in his chair, looking at her, and Josie saw something shift in those cold blue eyes. It didn't vanish. The cold was still there. But underneath, at the deepest layer, something softened. Just slightly. Almost invisible. But it was there. Like the first crack on the surface of a frozen lake when spring finally touches it. Tristan stood. He pulled a business card from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Black with embossed silver lettering. No logo. Only a name and a phone number. He placed it on the table and slid it gently toward Josie. Come see me. 2 words. No explanation. No when. No why. No mention of pay or a title. Tristan Kincaid wasn't the kind of man who made detailed offers in a crowded restaurant. He offered a door. Whether she walked through it was her choice. Josie stared at the card on the marble tabletop, lying beside the dark spill of coffee from Sergei's shattered cup that still hadn't been wiped away. The card was smaller than her palm, but heavier than anything she'd ever held. She picked it up carefully, with 2 fingers, the way you lifted something both valuable and dangerous. Tristan fastened his jacket button again and signaled to Reed. Reed nodded and moved ahead to clear the path. The 2 bodyguards at the door were already ready. Tristan took 2 steps, then stopped. He didn't turn fully, only glanced back over his shoulder at Josie. Josie. She lifted her head. Whether you come or not, from today, you're no longer invisible. I see you. Then he walked away. The doors of Le Select closed behind his group. Josie stood in the middle of the dining room, black card clenched in her hand, surrounded by the eyes of the entire restaurant fixed on her, and those last words kept ringing in her skull like a bell. I see you. 27 years. 27 years of living like a ghost. Her father dead, her mother paralyzed, dropping out of school, carrying plates, wiping tables, being humiliated, being looked through, being treated like furniture. 27 years of nobody seeing her. And the first person to say those words to her was the most dangerous man she'd ever met. Josie tightened her grip on the card, felt its sharp edge press into her skin, and she didn't know if she was shaking from fear or because for the first time in her life, she felt real. That night, Josie got back to the studio in the Bronx at 9 in the evening. Patricia had been gone for hours. Her mother lay in the dark with her eyes open, staring up at the ceiling. Josie clicked on the small lamp by the bed, sat on the edge of the thin mattress, and took her mother's hand. Gloria looked at her daughter, blinking, her mouth moving as if she were trying to say something, but only an unclear sound came out. Josie understood. After 2 years, she could read everything her mother wanted to say through her eyes. Her mother was asking if she was okay. Josie smiled and said, "I'm okay, Mom," then leaned down and kissed her forehead. But she wasn't okay. She gave her mother the evening medication, pulled the blanket up, waited until she fell asleep, then sat at the kitchen table. The envelopes were still piled there. $3,200 in hospital bills, $480 for prescriptions, rent overdue, electricity overdue. And now, right in the middle of that pile, Josie placed one more thing, the black business card with embossed silver letters. Tristan Kincaid, Chief Executive Officer, Kincaid Holdings. She stared at the card, then at the bills, then back at the card. Two worlds sitting side by side on the same tabletop. One world crushing her day after day. One world that could set her free, and could also swallow her whole. Josie picked up her phone, opened her messages, and found her chat with Irina. Moscow time was early morning, but Irina always woke early. Josie typed in Russian, the way they'd done ever since Irina left America. I'm standing in front of a big decision. I'm scared, Irina replied 3 minutes later. My girl, being scared is normal, but don't let fear choose for you. Trust yourself. You're stronger than you think. Josie read the message again and again, then looked at her mother sleeping, listening to the steady, heavy rhythm of her breathing. She looked down at the stack of bills. She looked at the business card. $25,000 a month. That number could wipe out the bills in a single month. It could move her mother somewhere better. It could get her better insurance, a private nurse, medication at the proper dose. It could let her mother live, instead of merely exist. But the price. Josie couldn't sleep that night. She lay there listening to rats in the walls, the upstairs neighbors fighting, her mother shifting and making soft, pained sounds in her sleep, and she thought about her father, about Irina, about Tristan Kincaid and those cold blue eyes that, for one brief moment, had softened when they looked at her, about his last words. From today, you're not invisible anymore. 3 days later, Josie stood in front of the Kincaid Holdings building in Midtown Manhattan. 50 floors of glass and steel rising straight into the gray November sky. She wore the only pair of black slacks she owned, a white blouse from Goodwill that she'd ironed 3 times that morning, and black flats with worn heels that were still clean. Her dark brown hair hung loose, not twisted into the tight bun she wore at the restaurant. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't trying to disappear. The receptionist in the lobby looked her up and down, eyes pausing on the worn shoes, the slightly oversized blouse, the way she stood, like someone who wasn't used to stepping into a building like this. Can I help you? Polite, but distant. I have a meeting with Mr. Kincaid. The receptionist lifted an eyebrow. Your name? Josie Beckett. The woman typed into her computer, and her expression changed completely, fast and unmistakable, like someone had flipped a switch. Surprise, then respect, then even a hint of nervousness. Miss Beckett, yes. Mr. Kincaid is expecting you. 50th floor. Mr. Calloway will meet you at the elevator. Josie stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and she saw her reflection multiplied endlessly in the mirrored walls. A 27-year-old girl raised in the South Bronx, heading up to the 50th floor of one of the most powerful buildings in Manhattan. Reed Calloway met her on the 50th floor, gave a short nod, didn't smile, but his eyes were different from the restaurant. He wasn't looking at her like a threat to assess. He was looking at her like someone who had been cleared. He led her down a marble-floored hallway to the last office. The door opened. Tristan sat behind a dark wood desk with a phone tucked at his shoulder, signaling for her to come in and sit. Josie lowered herself into the leather chair across from him and waited. When Tristan hung up, he looked at her. Mikhail Volkov and Sergei Petrov have been handled. His voice was flat, and he didn't explain what handled meant. And Josie didn't ask. She understood that in this world there were questions you didn't put into the air. My team traced them back and found they've run at least 4 similar operations in Europe over the past 3 years. Total losses over $200 million. You didn't just save my money, you broke the entire pipeline. He slid a folder across the desk. Josie opened it. A job offer. Title, Language and International Liaison Specialist, reporting directly to the Chief Executive Officer. Salary, $25,000 a month, comprehensive medical insurance for her and 1 dependent. College tuition support. Josie read every line, her hands trembling slightly. That was everything she'd ever known. $25,000 a month was something she'd never dared to imagine, not even in her wildest dreams, but she didn't sign right away. She looked up and met Tristan's eyes. I have 1 condition. Tristan tilted his head, didn't speak, just waited. I won't help you hurt anyone who's innocent. The room went silent. Reed Calloway, standing near the door, lifted one eyebrow slightly. Tristan watched Josie for a long time, his blue eyes reading her, weighing her, and Josie held his gaze without blinking. She knew she was placing a condition on a Mafia boss. She knew it could make him take everything back. But if she stepped into this world without boundaries, she'd lose herself. And losing herself was the same as losing everything. Tristan nodded, slow and final. Deal. Josie picked up the pen and signed. During Josie's first week, Reed walked her through procedures, communication systems, and the organizational structure. On the surface, everything ran like a normal investment corporation. Meeting schedules, reports, internal emails. But Josie was smart enough to notice the gaps between the lines, the calls that never appeared on the calendar, the rooms her badge couldn't open. She didn't ask. She learned fast, and Reed noticed. At the end of the first week, he said to Tristan, while Josie was in the next room, his voice low enough to be private but still audible through the wall. "She's smart. Smart in a dangerous way," Tristan answered, short. "I know." The first negotiation came on day 10. 3 Russian businessmen from an energy group in Moscow. This time real people, a real company, a real deal. Josie had checked everything beforehand, cross-referenced documents, searched business registrations, verified identities. Never again would she let something like that happen. The meeting started in English, but when it moved into technical details, the Russian side switched into their native language for internal discussion. Josie translated, not word for word like a machine, but meaning, context, and the shades only someone who understood the culture could catch. When the Russian lead used an old Moscow business idiom, Josie didn't just translate the literal meaning. She explained the implication to Tristan in one short, precise sentence, and he made the perfect counteroffer. The Russians looked at her, stunned. One of them asked in Russian where she'd learned, and she answered, "In Queens, from a wonderful woman." They laughed, nodded, and the air in the room shifted. The deal wrapped up 2 hours earlier than expected. When the Russian partners left, Tristan didn't say anything. But that night, while Josie sat at her desk drafting the report, she saw a cup of coffee appear beside her papers. Black Americano, no sugar, a hint of cinnamon. Exactly the way she liked it. She'd never told anyone in that building how she took her coffee. She looked up and saw Tristan walking past, not looking back, not saying a word. She watched him disappear behind his office door and felt something warm in her chest, small, light, but unmistakable. Small moments kept happening in the weeks that followed. Tristan's hand rested on the small of her back as he guided her through a meeting room door. A brief touch, only seconds, but the heat of his palm went through the fabric of her blouse, and Josie felt every finger. He asked about her mother once, quietly, without making it a thing, only asking if she was okay, and he didn't push when he saw Josie's eyes turn red. He remembered she liked the chair by the window in the conference room, and from then on, that seat was always empty when she arrived. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. Then came that night. It was close to 11, the building nearly empty, and Josie stayed late to finish an urgent contract translation. She was walking down the 50th floor hallway when she saw the light still on in Tristan's office. The door was cracked open. She meant to keep going, but she heard his voice. Not the command voice, not the familiar cold one. A different voice, low, tired, almost vulnerable. She stopped. Tristan sat behind his desk, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up, and in front of him was a small photo in a silver frame she'd never seen before. He looked up when he noticed her shadow at the door, and instead of shutting down the way she expected, he gave a small nod. Josie stepped in and sat in the chair across from him. Tristan was quiet for a long time. Then he turned the frame so she could see. The man in the photo looked like Tristan, the same blue eyes, the same jaw, but older, and with a warmer smile. "My father," Tristan said, "shot dead when I was 23, a territory war between families. I took over the next day. No time to cry." Josie looked at the photo, then at Tristan. "My father was shot too," she said softly. "In front of me. I was 12. They looked at each other in silence. They didn't need more words. The same wound, the same grief, the same loss that shaped both their lives. Tristan was the one who looked away first. He set the photo face down, took a breath, and said in his usual voice again that she should go home. It was late. Josie stood, walked to the door, then stopped. "Thank you for telling me." Tristan didn't answer, but Josie saw him give a small nod in the glow of the desk lamp. The next week, Josie signed a lease for a 2-bedroom apartment in Riverdale, still in the Bronx, but safe and clean, with big windows looking out over a park. She hired a private nurse for her mother, 8 hours a day instead of 1 hour through Medicaid. She enrolled in evening college, international relations, at the City University of New York, tuition paid by Kincaid Holdings. On move-in day, when her mother was settled into the new bed in a bedroom flooded with sunlight, Gloria looked around, at the clean white walls with no trace of mold, at the wide window with new curtains, then at Josie. Her lips moved for a long time as she tried to speak, and for the first time in 2 years, Josie heard one clear word come out of her mother's mouth. "Daughter." Just one word. Josie dropped to her knees beside the bed, took her mother's hand, pressed it to her cheek, and said, her voice breaking, "You won't have to hurt anymore. I promise. I'll take care of you." Gloria cried. Josie cried. In that bright sunlit room, the two women held each other and cried. Not from the same misery as before, but because for the first time in a long time, there was hope. 6 months later, Josie was sitting in her own office on the 48th floor of Kincaid Holdings. On the glass door was a small plaque that read Josie Beckett, Director of International Relations. She'd hit every target Tristan set and gone far beyond them. She'd built partnerships with 4 Russian conglomerates, and she vetted and verified every contract so thoroughly that not a single line slipped past her. Her salary was $25,000 a month, exactly as Tristan had promised. She was in her first year of evening college at the City University of New York. Her mother had a private nurse for 8 hours a day, medication at the proper dose, and a sunlit room in Riverdale. Della Nguyen now worked in administration at Kincaid Holdings, hired through Josie's recommendation, earning 3 times what she'd made at La Selleck. Todd Brennan had been fired 2 weeks after the Table 7 incident. Not because Tristan ordered it, but because the restaurant's management discovered he'd been stealing servers' tips for years, exactly what Della had suspected all along. That night, close to midnight, the building was empty. Josie stayed late, translating an urgent file for a meeting the next morning. She went up to the 50th floor to grab supporting documents and saw the light still on in Tristan's office. The door was slightly open. She knocked softly and stepped in. Tristan sat behind his desk, his suit jacket draped over the chair, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, turning a whiskey glass slowly in his hand. She knew he didn't drink much, but tonight was different. He looked up at her, and Josie realized he was tired. Not the tiredness of missing sleep, but the tiredness of carrying too much for too long, with nowhere to set it down. Josie sat in the chair across from him, didn't speak, just waited. The silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence between 2 people who didn't need to fill every space with words. Then Tristan spoke, voice low and slow, not looking at her, looking down at the whiskey. You know, in this world, people stay near me because they're afraid or because they want something. No one stays because they want to stay. Reed is loyal, but that's a code of honor, not because he chose me. Partners are here for money. Enemies are here because they're scared. I live among hundreds of people, and I've never been able to trust anyone. He lifted his head, blue eyes locking onto Josie's. You're the only person I trust, Josie. Not because you're afraid of me, not because you need money, but because that day in the restaurant, you could have stayed silent, safe, and no one would have known, but you chose to speak. You chose to do the right thing when doing the right thing could have killed you. I've never met anyone like that. Not once. Josie felt her eyes burn. She swallowed, then said softly, "And you're the only one who ever saw me. 27 years, I lived like a ghost. My father died, my mother got sick. I carried plates and poured water for people who never looked at my face. Todd told me I was nothing. Customers looked right through me. I started to believe it, but that day, in that restaurant, when I spoke and you stopped and listened, when you looked at me, really looked, that was the first time in my life I felt real." The room was so quiet Josie could hear the distant city outside the glass, horns, wind, the sound of New York that never slept. Tristan set the whiskey down. He stood. He walked around the desk, slow, step by step, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. He stopped in front of Josie. She stood too. She didn't even know when it happened, only that she was standing across from him, close enough to feel the heat of his body, the scent of sandalwood and whiskey, the measured rhythm of his breath. Tristan lifted a hand and touched her face, gentle, gentler than she would have believed possible, from a hand that had ordered ruthless things. His fingers traced her jawline, paused at her chin, and tilted her face up. Josie didn't step back. She looked into his eyes, and in those blue eyes that were usually ice cold, she saw what he kept hidden from the entire world. Loneliness, hunger, the fear that he didn't deserve anything good. The first kiss wasn't rushed. It was slow, soft, lips to lips, then a pause, like a question, like he was waiting for permission, then deeper. Josie closed her eyes and felt everything she'd carried, the pain of losing her father, the weight of caring for her mother, the humiliations, the nights she cried alone. All of it loosened a little, just a little, but enough that she could breathe. And Tristan, the man who was never allowed to be weak, let his guard drop for the first time in his life. When they pulled apart, Tristan didn't speak. He only rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, breathing slow. 2 wounded people finding each other inside a ruthless world. Josie left the building close to 1 in the morning. She walked along the midtown sidewalk, the May air mild. Her phone vibrated. A message from Irina in Russian. "Josie, I saw an interview in a Russian business magazine about the talented American interpreter at Kincaid Holdings. I always knew you were special. You're my best student." Josie smiled and typed back in Russian. "It all started with you, Irina, with the first word, chashka." Irina replied with 1 word, korosho, good. Josie slipped her phone into her pocket and kept walking. She passed Le Select. The restaurant was closed, lights off, Tables and chairs sunk into darkness behind the glass. She stopped for a second and looked inside. The tables she'd wiped thousands of times. The bar where Todd used to stand with his arms crossed, watching her like she was trash. She didn't go in. She didn't need to. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She'd proven it to herself. Josie walked on. Her phone vibrated again. A message from Tristan. "You home safe." Josie smiled. A real smile. The kind that had been gone from her face for a long time and came back tonight. Almost. She typed. She looked at the city around her. New York. Huge. Chaotic. Ruthless. And still full of miracles if you dared to believe. 27 years Josie Beckett had lived like a ghost. Invisible. Dismissed. Forgotten. But she proved that a person's worth didn't live in a diploma on a wall or a bank balance. It lived in courage. The courage to stand up and do the right thing at the hardest moment. That talent could come from anywhere. From a shabby studio in the Bronx. From a lonely elderly woman in Queens. From 4 years of late nights studying while the world slept. That you should never underestimate anyone. Because the girl carrying your plates, the one you couldn't be bothered to look at, might be the person who saves your life. And that each of us, wherever we are, whatever we're living through, deserves to be seen. If Josie's story touched your heart, please like and share this video so the message reaches more people. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories every day. We'd love to hear you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever been underestimated and then risen? Or have you ever watched someone be judged too small and then shine? Share it in the comments. We read every line, and we truly value every feeling that comes from the deepest part of your heart. We wish everyone watching good health, a joyful life, peaceful days, and a heart full of love. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.